All right, if you've got an exam on real business cycle models coming up, you are in the right place. This is your study guide. We're going to break down everything you need to know about fiscal and monetary policy inside the RBC world, one slide at a time. Let's dive in.
So, to really get RBC models, you first have to understand why they were even invented. Back in the 1970s, the economic models everyone was using, mostly Keynesian stuff, they just stopped working. They completely fell apart. They couldn't explain this weird new world of high inflation and high unemployment happening at the same time. It was a total crisis for the field, and it created this huge opening for a brand new way of thinking about the economy.
Here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why RBC models came to be. Then we're going to pop the hood and look at the core mechanics of the model, the engine, if you will. After that, we'll start adding parts. First, government and taxes, then we'll plug in money, and we'll wrap it all up with the key debates and the big takeaways that you'll definitely want to have locked down for your exam.
Okay, so Section 1. To really appreciate what these models are, we have to see the problems they were built to fix. It's all about the foundation.
You can kind of think of macroeconomics evolving in 3 big stages. Phase 1 was just about figuring out how to measure things, like GDP. Phase 2, that was the era of those big Keynesian models. But here's the problem. They weren't really theories about human behavior. They were more like super complex statistical summaries of what happened in the past, without really getting at the why.
And this was the bombshell that blew it all up, the Lucas critique. Economist Robert Lucas basically said, look, your models are built on historical data, but people aren't robots. If the government changes a policy, like a tax law, people will change their behavior. That means all your historical data becomes useless for predicting the future. It was a killer argument against the old way of doing things.
So what was the solution? Well, you basically had to throw everything out and start from scratch. This was the big rebirth of macro. Instead of just looking at big picture data, economists started building models from the ground up. They're called Dynamic General Equilibrium, or DGE models. And the whole idea is to build the entire economy based on the choices of individuals. Households trying to be happy, firms trying to make a profit. We call this building from micro foundations.
All right, let's see how these models actually work. We're going to build the absolute core of the RBC model, the basic engine. So for now, just picture a world with no government, no money. It's just people and companies trying to make the best decisions they can.
This map basically gives you the whole blueprint. See, down at the bottom you have the micro foundations. That's our consumers and firms making choices. They all meet and interact in different markets, for goods, for labor, for capital. And all those individual interactions, when you add them up, create the big macroeconomic things we see, like GDP growth and unemployment.
So, at the very heart of this model, you have 2 main characters. You've got a representative household and a representative firm. The household is just trying to maximize its happiness or utility over its lifetime by making trade-offs between buying stuff and enjoying leisure time. And the firm? It's even simpler. It just wants to maximize profit. That's it. And they do their business in competitive markets.
So if everyone is just rationally doing their thing, what causes booms and busts? Well, here's the core idea of RBC theory: technology shocks. Think of these as random, out-of-the-blue changes in how productive the economy is. A positive shock could be a huge innovation, like the internet. A negative shock could be a sudden spike in oil prices that makes everything more expensive to produce. And here's the radical part. In this view, a recession isn't a sign of failure. It's the economy's best possible response to a bad shock.
So, does this simple model actually match the real world? Well, take a look. It's kind of a mixed bag, which is super interesting. Look at investment volatility. The model gets pretty darn close to the real US data. That's a huge win. But then, look at consumption and hours worked. The model predicts they should be way more stable than they actually are. So while it's a great start, this tells us pretty clearly that our simple engine is missing some important parts. Okay, time for an upgrade. Let's bolt on the first major new component to our engine: a government. A government that spends money and, of course, has to tax people to pay for it. This is how we get fiscal policy into the model.
Now, how the government gets its money is absolutely crucial. There are 2 ways. First, there are lump sum taxes. Think of this like a cover charge for living in the economy. It's a fixed amount and there's nothing you can do to avoid it. Then there are distortionary taxes, which are the ones we're all familiar with, taxes on income or on investments. They're called distortionary because they change your incentives to work and save.
And this brings us to a classic exam topic, so listen up: Ricardian equivalence. The theory goes like this.
As long as people are smart and forward-looking, and taxes are lump sum, it makes no difference whether the government pays for its spending with taxes today or with debt. Why? Because rational households know that government debt is really just a tax bill that's been postponed. It doesn't actually make them feel any richer, so they don't change their spending habits.
But what if taxes aren't lump sum? This slide shows you everything you need to know. Look at the left. With lump sum taxes, when the government spends more, output actually goes up. People feel a little poorer because of the tax, so they decide to work more. But now look at the right. When the government has to use distortionary income taxes, that same spending increase causes output to fall. Why? Because the higher tax on labor makes working less attractive. This is huge. It shows that Ricardian equivalence breaks down and that how you finance government spending really matters.
Okay, we've added government. Time for the second big upgrade. Let's introduce money into our world. And this gets us to one of the biggest questions in all of macroeconomics. Is money just a veil, something that doesn't really affect the real economy, or does it have genuine power?
So, there are two main ways to stick money into these models. One is called money in the utility function, or MIU. This basically just assumes that people like having cash around because it's convenient. In that world, it turns out money is neutral. It doesn't affect the real stuff. The other way is the cash in advance model, or CIA. This one has a strict rule. You must have the cash on hand before you can buy anything. And that little rule creates a much stronger link between money and the real economy.
And here is what happens when the central bank suddenly prints more money in that cash in advance model. They increase the money supply, M, but just look at what happens to output Y and consumption C. They both go down. They fall. I mean, that's just totally backward from what you'd expect, right?
Exactly. This is the kind of result that professors love to put on exams because it really tests if you understand the model's inner workings. How on earth could printing more money cause the economy to actually shrink? It seems impossible.
Okay, here's the step-by-step logic, and you'll want to know this. 1. The new money causes inflation. 2. This inflation acts like a tax on holding cash and makes your money worth less. 3. Since you need cash to buy stuff, that inflation tax makes consumption more expensive. So what do rational people do? They substitute away from the now more expensive activities, working and consuming, and towards the cheaper one, leisure. And 4. When people work less, total output falls. It's a chain reaction.
All right, let's land the plane here. In this last section, we're going to synthesize everything. We'll focus on the big picture debates and the absolute key takeaways you need to nail for your exam.
This table really sums up one of the biggest fights in modern macro. In the pure RBC corner, you assume prices are perfectly flexible. So if the central bank prints more money, all prices just instantly adjust upward and nothing real like consumption changes. Money is neutral. But in the new Keynesian corner, they argue that prices are sticky. They don't change right away. So when there's more money, people can actually run out and buy more stuff before prices catch up. In that world, money is definitely not neutral.
And that leaves us with this, the big, final question that gets to the philosophical heart of the whole RBC framework. It really forces you to think, are recessions a disease, a problem that policymakers need to cure? Or are they actually the natural, healthy, even efficient way for a well-functioning economy to adapt to the random shocks that life throws at it? Chewing on that question is probably the best way to make sure you truly understand what this school of thought is all about.